Matthew 2, 1-2. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising, and we have come to pay him homage."
This year we've journeyed towards Christmas a little differently because we haven't gone strictly according to the lectionary. We've also begun to anticipate some of the stories at Christmas that sometimes get left out because, well, like today, we're looking at the story of the visit of the wise ones, the magi, sometimes called the kings from the east. Technically, this should be celebrated on Epiphany, but a lot of us aren't around for that. And as we journey through Christmas, though, what we've been particularly trying to do is to explore the symbols that exist in the story. We have the story, it happened or it didn't happen exactly as happened, it doesn't matter. The story is filled with symbols of meaning. And certainly with the visit of the Magi who came from the east and who inquired after Herod as to what this might be. And of course, to begin with, we have the star. Now, I'm not quite sure I know exactly what the star means, except that we use the word stars in our everyday life. I had my grandchildren here, and yesterday they were talking about, they were doing the game like 20 questions. Who am I? You know? Are you a male? You know? And then the next one says, are you a female? I would have thought that's a quite redundant question. And you're supposed to guess who it is. And I was intrigued that our grandchildren, they all were somebody of importance. Sometimes super importance, like Captain Marvel or have I got that right? Captain Marvel or Wonder Woman or whatever. But people of significance. People of significance. People who are called stars. The stars of the screen and stage, of course, we have about them. And of course, why are they stars? Well, sometimes it's because we project onto them our own wishes and desires, as ridiculous as it might be. Maybe I can't be as beautiful as Marilyn Monroe, we might say, if I'm a woman. But, you know, she embodies something of femininity that somehow, well, we all look up to. Now, you might sort of go completely different and have a star that is completely unlike someone like Marilyn Monroe. I won't name any names, but you can sort of think who they might be. Projections of our dreams and fantasies. But of course, what happens to these people that we put up on pedestals? They usually can tumble off and fall down. They don't actually live up to our dreams and expectations. But then the star in the story, what does that represent? Maybe looking for a sign of significance. We don't know what their star is. We do know that the people from the east, as in many cultures, people studied the stars, they knew their patterns, they knew what to expect. They knew there were constellations out there and there were these planets that sort of travelled differently. You could work out just exactly in what years where they might exactly move to. But then, of course, there was this unpredictable things in the sky. Where did that comet come from? That's not part of the plan. That's discontinuous with what we expect. How can we handle that? And it may be it was a comet-like appearance in the skies, that something different, something unexpected, maybe something wonderful. Let's go and see what it might mean. And so we have the visitors from the east following the star. And it's great that we have this story in the Gospel of Matthew about the visit of the wise men, because Matthew wants us to know that the birth of Jesus wasn't just of significance to the Jewish people, the people who came of that religious cultural tradition, But something is represented here. There's meaning here. There's significance here that's for all of humankind. That somehow we're going to have appearing on earth, and we're going to have that which is going to open our eyes to discover that within us, life is actually wonderful and good, and all the things that cover it over and make life bleak can melt away, and will be discovered that is of universal significance to people of all religions and of all cultures and all times.
Matthew 2, verses 3 to 6. When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel."
Bethlehem? Well, city of David, but I think most people have kind of forgotten that. I mean, Bethlehem is like a backwater town. I spent some of my childhood in Streaky Bay, and I can remember people saying, "Can any good ever come out of Streaky Bay?" Well, at least... Well, it was a bit like that with Bethlehem. Perhaps symbolic of the overlooked. For me, the presence of the incarnation, the birth of Jesus, is symbolised, I think, of the one who looks out for the ones who are the overlooked. And Christmas is sometimes the time when we particularly want to think of who are the overlooked people in our society, in our world. And it's no accident that I think that, again, we have the Christmas bowl appeal. That began back in a previous time, over 50 years ago, because they said there's refugees in our world. They need to be cared for. And so at Christmas time, we'll particularly think of those people who are the overlooked. And therefore, that's what the symbol of the Christmas bowl has been for us. But sometimes you and I can feel like we're overlooked. We're not understood. And therefore, I think we can be reminded that the ones who are overlooked, and even ourselves and anyone who is looked, are not forgotten in God's sight. Bethlehem, the city of David, that's where the infant Jesus will be born.
Matthew 2, verses 7 to 8. Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time of when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage."
And of course, the Bible doesn't call them kings. They're called wise men, and because the scriptural writers knew that they probably came from Persia, they also called them the Magi, or astrologers. But tradition tells us that they're also kings, and we'll have a look at that a little bit later. But the figure I want to focus on here, of course, is Herod. Symbolically, what does he represent? Who does he represent? He's, of course, Rome's pawn, because the Jewish people didn't really have kings. You know, they'd given up on kings when they returned from exile. But the Romans, in the way they ruled, they knew that they could manipulate some ways in such a way they could have someone there who'd be their puppet, who'd be Jewish, and of course, with a little bit of backing from Rome, could build that wonderful temple. And Herod flounced around, he liked his power. But does he not represent the people of the world who assume power and take power into themselves in such a way that they cherish that power, that they're going to make sure there's no dissenters, who are easily threatened when perhaps someone might suggest that there could be some other scheme, some kind of other danger. I mean, can you imagine Herod being threatened by the possible birth of a child? So I guess he wasn't sitting too safely on that throne. Maybe he'd picked up the rumours that there would be one born to be a Messiah, a different kind of leader, and he knew it certainly wasn't going to be him. And so, of course, the wise men were pretty canny. They could tell that this Herod was one to be watchful for. And as we'll know later when we read, of course, they decided not to go back to Herod to let him be. Okay, well, that's all part of the story. Just think that the story comes into the present and reminds us to be ever watchful of the people who would be those who assume power and think that they are the ones who, for example, can make their people great again.
Matthew 2, verses 9 to 12. When they heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road.
Wise men. How many were there? Actually, it doesn't say. 3 gifts. Doesn't say how many wise men actually came. Might have been 4 or 5. But I think we'll stick with 3, though. Seem to go along with the 3 gifts. And again, we're going to tease out the 3 wise men and the gifts and ask what might these represent. And yes, the 3 wise men, we can say, represent the wisdom of the ages, the wisdom of Gentiles. And most likely they did come from Persia. Now you have to see that in the framework of the ancient world there was the West, the Greco-Roman West, where of course the Jewish people is part of, embedded in there. And then the East represented Persia. That was the East. And the East had its own religion. It was one of the great religions of the world. And the Jewish people had already rubbed up against this culture, the people from the East. The Babylonians would have also been of that other religion called Zoroastrianism. Someone said, is it possible to imagine that a great religion of the world could almost die? Can you imagine Christianity or even Islamic religion dying off? It's hard to imagine, but Zoroastrianism has almost died out. Just a remnant left in the hills of Persia, or rebadged as the Baha'i. That's where the 3 wise men probably came. From that cultural tradition, they were outside the Jewish faith. They represented, let's call it, the universal. But then legend came in, and we have here a picture on a fresco in a church in Ravenna in Italy from the 7th century, I think. It's as old as that. And there are 3 names. Now, I don't know whether you can read them from there. Can anybody read what they say? Yeah. Balthazar, Melchior, and Caspar. By now, they've been given names. Now, this is legend. But let's take this and sort of go with it and see where it goes. Who might these 3 represent? And tradition has said they can represent 3 things. The 3 ages. The young, and who they represent, and the gift that they bring to society and to life. The middle age, the people in the prime of life, who, families with children and people work until the fields and they're active and they're in good health mostly, the prime of life. And the third age is well, if I use the word old, I'll put brackets around it. The elders. The elders. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the wise men are said to represent not just the East, but may represent at least 3 of the great cultures of the world. And some of the figures, I'm not quite sure, unless it's the one on the left, one of them is painted as black, almost black, coming from the south, black Africa. And what's represented by the people of the south and the kind of, when we'll play with this in a moment, ask ourselves what that might be. Another one is distinctly a Caucasian. Maybe that's the one in the middle. Represents the West. And then the third one is representative of all that we could call the East. South Asia, India, Pakistan, China, Japan. So that's the second thing. So they'd be symbolic of the ages, symbolic of the cultural, of at least 3 cultural traditions of humanity. And the third is each of the gifts, gold, frankincense and myrrh, will tell us something about Jesus, who Jesus would be. And the Protestant tradition picked up 3 things to talk about Jesus as being prophet, priest and king. And so we're going to hear now a little bit as to how those 3 dimensions of age, culture and religious significance in terms of who Jesus is, how it's played out. And first of all, Craig's going to introduce us to Melchior.
Melchior, someone who symbolises middle age. Cheryl, would you like to come forward? Someone in the prime of life. What are the gifts of this age? Well, it comes to mind that energy and enthusiasm for life touched with realism. Perhaps by the time we've reached middle age, we've learnt the practical application of knowledge, knowing how to do things towards the achievement of common good through a balance among interpersonal and intrapersonal communication. Or perhaps to put it another way, they've developed the street smarts, tempered by the ability to see and appreciate the needs and values and viewpoints of others, a recognition and acceptance of uncertainty, and seeing things in a lifespan context. Melchior is deemed to represent the cultural West. What are the gifts of Western civilization? Perhaps the greatest gift is the tradition of rationalism and rational thought in various spheres of life. The widespread employment of rational argument, favouring free thought, the assimilation of human rights and the need for equality and democracy, and advances in philosophy, science and mathematics. Melchior brought gold, symbolic of what? Because of its resistance to heat and acid, gold is a symbol of immutability, eternity and perfection. Because of its golden colour, it almost universally is associated with solar symbolism. It gives gold attributes such as vitality and life, radiance, wisdom, clarity, unification, virtue, light. But gold was a symbol of kingship. And at the time, gold was symbolic of kingship and royalty, fitting perhaps because both of Jesus' heavenly heritage as the Son of God and his earthly parentage as a descendant of King David. In what sense was Jesus king? Perhaps you could place the crown on the thorns.
We're going to take Caspar today, first of all, to be representative of the young. And I'm going to invite Will, if he wouldn't mind coming forward here. Thank you, Will. Here we have Will. Now, he's a representative person of all of those of you who are young today, and I'm going to call young up to at least 20. All right, who's up to 20? How many of you are here? Put your hands up. Okay, there's not many of us here. There's some of you. Yeah? Right. We delight in childhood and the young. Why do we? Because people like Will, they're energetic, they're smart, they carry with them just a certain kind of innocence. There's no pretense with kids. They know, and they can tell what's genuine and what's not. And they delight in great stories and great imagination. And of course, for many of us, they also represent the future. But Casper is also deemed to represent what I'm calling today the cultural East. The civilizations of the East. Now, it's a bit hard to generalise what their gifts are. But I lived in India long enough to sense that throughout India, no matter whether they're Hindu, Muslims, Jains or Parsis or whatever, even Christians, people have a spiritual sensibility that you don't tend to find in the West. And spirit also is that which allows people to transcend incredible hardships. Something can still sustain them. Still enables them to smile, despite poverty, despite flood. There's a big typhoon sweeping through India just at this moment, despite all that. Certain kind of gift of the mystery, the spirituality comes from the East. And you find this also in China, but it's framed differently there. The Chinese have this great sense of family and honouring the family. Again, they bring that gift to civilization. But the particular gift that Caspar brought is something called frankincense. What was that? Well, it was a hardwood resin that was used in worship, like an incense, and was meant to be symbolic of Jesus as the Christ, as priest. But not priest in the sense we sort of think of priests in churches and things like that or in other religions, but priest in the sense as the one who transmits the presence of the final mystery whom we call God. That Jesus is what some theologians call these days the human face of God. But also priest and worship and sacrifice go together. So instead of there being sacrifice, Jesus was to be the sacrificial lamb, the one who lived on behalf of others, the shepherd king, that kind of priest. And I thought, what are the symbols, though, that Jesus gives us that transmits to us the sense of the presence of God in our midst? It's the symbols that we have for communion. And so, Will, would you put these on the table as representative of the gifts that came from Caspar, representing the presence of God in Christ, in the symbols of bread and wine as in Jesus Christ. Thank you.
Balthazar, symbolic perhaps of someone in old age. Ruth, would you like to come up? Now, we're not saying you're old. You're an elder.
You can say she certainly is wise.
You are wise, certainly. What are the gifts of this age? Wisdom, associated with empathy and compassion for our fellow human beings, based on having experienced similar events or feelings oneself. The older we get, the less motivated and more available to others we can be. Perhaps in later life, people care less and have less concern with material cares, personal aches, pains and losses, and are able to identify more strongly with humanity and the universe as a whole. Balthasar is also deemed to represent the cultural South, and as we've heard, is often portrayed as black-skinned, coming from black Africa. What are the gifts of the South? Gifts of vitality, rhythm, colour, family, and interconnectedness of people within community come to mind. African cultures widely vary, but are marked by the morals they uphold, their love and respect for their culture, as well as the strong respect they hold for the aged and the important in their society. The self is seen not separate from the world, it is united and intermingled with the natural and social environment. In summing this up, an exousia proverb that is common to all African cultures and languages is a person through persons. Balthasar brought myrrh, symbolic of what? Myrrh is a spice or resin from a small thorny bush. It was bitter-smelling and also very expensive. But it was primarily known for its medicinal and preservative qualities and was used in embalming. It's a symbol of Christ Jesus as prophet. In what sense a prophet? Perhaps one who stands for truth, even against the odds, as Jesus did with Pilate. Once lit, the aromas permeates all the secret hiding places. Ruth, would you like to place these on the altar and light the incense stick?